Thanks for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. Today, as a result of many questions I've had recently about how much protein we can actually take in a meal. I've been talking about protein a lot, getting a lot of questions. And the question is, how much protein do we need in a day? But also, how much can we eat in one meal? As we're talking about meal frequency maybe being reduced. And of course, we've all heard the kind of the assumptions or the bro science, if you want to call it, or even people writing articles about 30 grams, 40 grams being the most you can absorb in one meal. And we know 20, 25 grams of animal protein is certainly the accepted minimal amount to stimulate. It's a minimum to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So in other words, muscle production, muscle development, right? Recovery, related to the amount of leucine, which is amino acid, related to the amount of leucine that is present in 20 to 25 grams of animal proteins. It'd take a lot more protein from a plant source to get enough leucine for that. But and then there's plenty of people in the keto and low carb community that will say too much at once has too great of an impact on insulin. It could interrupt ketone production, which it may, and then trigger gluconeogenesis. Well, we're going to talk about gluconeogenesis because that's really what it comes down to as far as this question of an apparent or perceived negative effect on blood sugar. So we're going to dig into why gluconeogenesis is not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually quite a normal thing. But there were some studies at one point saying that about 30 grams was the most that could be absorbed and actually used in one sitting. Now those, it's pretty well accepted now that those studies were pretty flawed. Actually, they were basically measuring nitrogen in the urine of some older or elderly adults. This doesn't really tell the whole story because it doesn't show that the protein is being passed out of the colon or that you're losing more carbon. It's just losing nitrogen, which is a byproduct of protein digestion. But just because nitrogen's coming out of your system doesn't mean you're wasting protein, or the protein's not being used in some way, either structurally or oxidized for fuel. So when it comes to, in my opinion, let's just talk about the gluconeogenesis affecting fat burning and why that's sometimes a fear. When it comes to fat burning, in my opinion, meal frequency plays much, well, it's a huge role. In my opinion, a greater role than eating too much protein would. But it definitely plays a huge role in the amount of insulin and blood sugar levels in your bloodstream throughout the day. Really, and that's important, because when insulin is high, you can't burn fat. But when insulin comes back down after a meal, right, which could be, depending on the meal, could be 2 hours, could be 4 hours, could be more if you're insulin resistant. So it could take that long after you eat for insulin levels to come back down, blood sugar levels to come back down to allow fat burning to take place. So if you're eating every 3 or 4 hours throughout the day, 6 times a day, 5 times a day, including the snacks, okay, you're gonna have a hard time burning fat. I mean, you're just not gonna have a chance unless you're sleeping, right? And you figure after your dinner, if you had a nice, normal, good-sized dinner, 3 or 4 hours after dinner, that's when the fat burning starts. And then if you wake up first thing and start eating, so let's say your eating lasts from say 6 or 7 a.m. till, I don't know, 8 p.m., you're really limiting the amount of time you have to burn fat. So, of course, again, when insulin's low, you're going to burn more fat, but your body's also in a state of gluconeogenesis to replace liver and muscle glycogen, because you're not going to supply all of your energy stores just from fat. I'm sorry. It just can't happen. Fat and ketones alone. We can't turn fat into glucose or glycogen. Glycogen being how we store glucose in the liver and the muscles. So it's just impossible. I mean, it doesn't work that way. There are some, technically, for you biochemistry nerds out there, nerd note, when you break down a fat molecule, a triglyceride, we primarily use the chains of molecules, right? But the glycerin is released. That can be used to convert to glucose, technically, yes, but we can't actually turn the chains of fat, the individual chains of fat into glucose. The only way to replace glucose is either with glucose, with carbs, right? Sometimes we can convert fructose into an energy like that too, but it's primarily glucose and then protein. We convert protein into glucose through gluconeogenesis. Now, okay, so when blood sugar's low, insulin comes down. We know that. That signals other hormones like glucagon to tell our liver to burn fat, start releasing fat for fuel, and that it may need, because the liver is going to start, when blood sugar is down, the way our blood sugar is regulated is through the liver glycogen. So glucagon would signal the liver, hey, we can start releasing glucose or glycogen into the bloodstream again, so it doesn't get too low. But in order to replace that liver glycogen is only about can only hold about 100 grams of glycogen, which is only about 400 calories. We can burn that through that pretty quickly. So it's going to trigger to start breaking down protein to replace the glycogen in the liver. And if you just worked out or done something stressful and you haven't eaten, you're going to, and there's no carbs available. Let's just say blood sugar is low. You are going to, again, either break down muscle or break down some protein that might be in the system, might be in the gut, is being delivered to the liver. You're going to start oxidizing that for glucose. So, and when you wake up in the morning, for instance, cortisol. So there's stress hormones that can stimulate gluconeogenesis as well, but cortisol will trigger, like when you wake up, that it's called the dawn effect with a lot of people who are trying to regulate their blood sugar. Their blood sugar is higher when they wake up in the morning. Well, that's just part of our body giving us our little dose of breakfast. Essentially, it's an internal breakfast. You don't have to eat anything. It's just cortisol triggers your body to release some glucose into your system. So your blood sugar goes up a little bit. Does it spike to 200? Hopefully not. Unless you have some insulin resistant issues, it can. But even if you're normal blood sugar or insulin sensitive, it definitely going up over 100 in many cases. It's not uncommon. It doesn't have to. It can be in the 90s, but it's not uncommon to go up to the hundreds or while you're working out. When you work out, that stress, okay, you're burning off blood sugar, obviously, that stress of the workout, okay, plus your blood sugar is probably low anyway, but the stress of the workout will trigger your liver to not only keep blood sugar levels at normal levels, say under 95, let's say, but to go up above that. Can you actually, especially a very stressful, high intensity workout, is going to trigger your liver to release more glucose into your system. Get up in the low hundreds, say it's 105, 110, 115, 120. You're right in there. That's pretty normal for a healthy person. Okay. In other words, someone who is not insulin resistant, doesn't have a pre-diabetic situation going on. So gluconeogenesis is just normal. And when no carbs are present, let's say you're just walking around, okay, blood sugar is low, you're not eating, you're not snacking, you're in let's say a fasted state, okay, so I won't get too technical about that, but basically blood sugar is normal, you don't have any food coming into your bloodstream from the gut, and you're just kind of cruising, work day, errands, normal chores, whatever it is, heart rate's not up, not a stressful environment. To maintain blood sugar, your liver puts glucose into your bloodstream. Again, it doesn't want to run out of that. If it runs out of that, you're in trouble, honestly. So it triggers glucagon, because insulin's low, it triggers glucagon to come up. Again, break down protein from somewhere, whether it's digested from the gut or it's muscle tissue, or some of the recycled proteins. We'll talk about that, but basically muscle tissue, to break down and oxidize it, to use it to turn into fuel, glucose, glycogen for the liver. So which would you rather have, especially if your goal is weight loss and fat burning? Would you rather have a big dose of blood sugar and an insulin spike from a big carb intake, or a dose of glycogen that's regulated by your liver in the amount that it feels you need to handle the stress or the activity of the moment, which could be at normal levels, That's from gluconeogenesis. It's from breaking down proteins. So if you're looking for, so it really does depend on your goal. And I say it like that because it depends on what you're after. If you want a quick recovery and burning fat is not a priority, then the carbs will work quicker. Taking in a sweet potato or something, some rice, something like that's going to work more quickly to recover glycogen levels that might have been depleted from workout or just a long day. Workout, go back to the muscles, right? Or just replace what's in the liver. This is great for athletes who are training, several hours a day, and they're not worried about their body composition. Performance is much more important. Recovering for the next day's workouts is much more important than burning fat. So quick recovery, rebuilding those glycogen levels, far more important than burning fat. If your goal is to burn fat or get more efficient at it, improve your insulin sensitivity, maybe bring your insulin levels down, bring your A1C down overall, then you probably want to stick with gluconeogenesis, right? Keep carbs low, allow your body to break down the protein as needed. Now, carb intake and even frequent meals like 4 to 6 times a day are not going to be the best strategy for burning fat. As I mentioned before, insulin goes up, it blocks fat burning, even if it's a protein only meal. Insulin's going to go up for a little shorter time, but still going to go up. And for that time, it's going to block fat burning. Now it'll come down sooner and it doesn't go up as high. So it basically, you'll regain normal levels much sooner with a protein, let's say a protein only or protein and like non-starchy veggies. That'll come down much sooner than if you had a starch with that. But in regards to meal frequency, 1 to 3 meals a day is a much better strategy than eating 4 to 5 times a day in general, whatever you're eating, because again, you have fewer interruptions, right? Even if it's a larger meal, it's still going to come down sooner. You're going to have less time out of fat burning mode than if you ate 5 or 6 times a day. Versus 2. 2 is usually pretty sustainable. It's where I try to get a lot of people to get to, a lunch and a dinner. Okay. But just 2 meals a day, whatever that looks like for you, is ideal. If you do 3 meals and not snack at all, and that's your first step, great, go for it. And then try to fit in some 2 meal days here and there. Good. But the point is, if you're not eating some carbs and you need a source for your liver to replace that glycogen, like it or not, you're going to be breaking down muscle or ingested protein. And if you're trying to burn fat, the fewer meals, the better. So it makes sense to increase protein intake, not only throughout the day to make up for the carbs, because you're going to be breaking down protein, right? Breaking down muscle, but also increase your protein at your meals because you're eating fewer meals. So you've got to get enough protein. And we need the protein to help preserve muscle while losing fat. Like, so average, low carb diet or low calorie diet, typical people just cut calories. So dieting, losing weight, about 25% of that weight loss comes from muscle on average. Well, you can avoid that or minimize that impact of losing muscle by increasing protein intake and not eating so often. So you're getting out of the way, lowering insulin levels so that your body can actually replace those calories with fat instead of lowering its metabolic rate. So, but higher, more protein, taking in more protein will give your body something to convert into glucose rather than muscle tissue. And not muscle weight, it'll break down fat instead. So, as well as the protein, but getting out of the way. In other words, clarify: fewer meals, more time in a fasted state, more time burning fat, stored fat. So again, makes sense to increase protein intake, preserve the muscle. If you're exercising, this does help preserve muscle when you're losing weight as well. That stimulates it. And then you add the protein. That adds a greater need for protein. Really, if you're exercising, you're going to have something to rebuild that structure, right? Because you're breaking down protein when you eat. You're uploading more amino acids and proteins to repair that tissue, but you're also using more energy. So you're going to need more protein to offset the exercise to make sure you're not breaking down the muscle. So a little nerd note another nerd note here. The liver will turn just about any amino, any type of protein into energy. Will oxidize almost any protein. The muscles can actually only oxidize branched chain amino acids. So the ones that are most abundant and complete in animal protein. So those are the best ones for muscle breakdown, muscle oxidation, as well as muscle protein synthesis. They just have more of the complete proteins. And there's nothing else. I mean, there's a little bit of fat associated with it, but there's no carb intake with animal proteins. But now, your body recycles proteins every day. And not only can it recycle those aminos after you've eaten them, like much longer after you've eaten them. Like it takes a long time to get through your gut. Okay. It could take hours, many hours to get, like 6-8 hours to get a meal all the way through your gut into your bloodstream where it can be used for structure or for fuel. But even if you don't supply it with new protein, it's going to do it anyway, which is why, it takes it from muscle stored, as we mentioned already, stored protein. You store most of your protein in your body as muscle. You have a little bit that's what's called extracellular protein. I don't want to get too deep into that. There's a lot of theories about it. They don't really know exactly how that works, but it does help with muscle protein synthesis, but we can't store a lot extracellular. So there's some stored in the gut from eating, right? Passing through from the gut to the bloodstream, liver. But the main place of storage for protein for use when we need it is muscle. So even if you're not eating it, you're still going to break it down for gluconeogenesis. It's just going to come from your muscles. May not be ideal for everybody to have it come from muscles, but this process of what's called protein turnover is normal unless you're stuffing your face with carbs all day, right? Unless you're eating frequently and you're blocking. So if insulin levels are up, you're not going to go in the gluconeogenesis much at all, just like fat burning. But if you're limiting your food frequency, you're burning more fat, more fasted periods, or longer periods without eating, I should say, at least 4 more hours, you're going to have protein turnover more regularly. Okay. But in general, okay, every day, generally. So even with the way normal diets are right now, which is not great, and eat a lot of frequent eating, generally humans turn over about at least 250 grams of protein per day. They're dismantled, recycled, and then new proteins are built. So that's constant turnover of protein happening. It's just part of metabolism. It's part of regenerating new tissue. And that's organs that could be in some degree in bone, for sure. There's a lot of collagen in there that's rebuilt. Bones are a great source or a great storage place for protein. But a lot of it's in muscle as well, but all tissues, because you make all tissue. The building blocks are amino acids, proteins of all tissue, skin, vascular tissue, eyeballs. Okay. All of it. So we recycle these damaged or oxidized amino acids. So when we eat protein, it helps provide replacement for these damaged aminos and allows us, if there's something so damaged that we really shouldn't be using them, it lets us release those. And we just use the new one coming in. And also, of course, as I mentioned before, offsets the use of stored protein in the form of muscle. And looking at research, there doesn't appear to be really an upper limit as to how much protein can be eaten at one time in terms of our ability to absorb it and it being delivered to the bloodstream and being available for tissues. There's really no upper limit. See, I got the study here, and I've listed several studies that support what I'm talking about in the show notes, and they'll be in the show notes and the YouTube captions. But let me see here. Find the right one. 1 second. Here we go. Anabolic response to a meal containing different amounts of protein is not limited by the maximal stimulation of protein synthesis in healthy young adults. In other words, just because there's maybe an amount that we can use from muscle protein synthesis, and there's a decreasing amount past 30 or 40 grams that it really impacts it. So 20 grams versus 40 grams on muscle protein synthesis, 40 grams only increases your muscle protein synthesis by about 20% over 20 grams. So it's a decreasing gain, the more you eat. But that doesn't, just because there's a decreasing gain in muscle protein synthesis doesn't mean we aren't absorbing all that protein that we're eating and that it isn't made available for use. In other words, there's more uses than muscle protein synthesis. We use it, we oxidize it for gluconeogenesis and other uses. So it's not all about muscle, right? Because again, we use it for organ tissue, veins, eyes, brain, skin, everything, right? Skin being the largest organ in your body, right? This stuff, the skin, we need it. Protein to replace those cells, or to go into those cells to replace that tissue. So this basically, their finding was they used resistance-trained young adults. They gave them meals of 40 grams per meal and then of 70 grams at one meal. 70 sounds like a lot to many of you. That's about what I eat, a lot of my meals. But there was actually, the 70-gram meal actually led to much less stored protein breakdown. So the more protein they ate at the meal, there was less breakdown of muscle tissue for the gluconeogenesis, for the turnover that is happening. No matter what you do, you're turning over protein. You starve it, you undereat the protein that you need for turnover, you're going to take it from muscle. That's basically. So here's their conclusion. I'll just read it as they put it, so you don't have to rely on my opinion. In conclusion, whole body net protein balance improves with greater protein intake above that previously suggested to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis because of a simultaneous reduction in protein breakdown. That's a real succinct, educated way of saying what I just stumbled through a minute ago. But I'm just, did you get the point? The more you eat, the less you break down from your muscle. That's basically what it's saying. So, and again, the research showing, I've got some of these articles listed if you want to look at them, and some articles and some are studies, and some of them have links to studies in the articles, if that makes sense. But research does not show an upper limit on either per meal or per day for humans. So they've had great results showing daily ranges of, say, for total daily ranges, 0.75 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So you weigh 175 pounds, 0.75 to 1 gram, you're looking at about 130 to 175 grams per day. For you, my not in the U.S., my non-U.S. Listeners, that's 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So they've seen good results in those ranges. Okay, as well as great results for these. A lot of these are based on, depending on what your activity needs are. If you're lifting, doing resistance training, exercising a lot, your protein needs are going to be greater because you're turning over more protein with the exercise. Not only with the activity, burning it, but with the needs for structural repair, right? Also, at levels of 1 to 1.6 grams per pound of body weight. It's almost double. Actually, a little go to the top end of that is actually more than double of the low end of the previous group. So these are different studies that support that amount, 1 to 1.6 grams per pound of body weight, or for, again, in kilos, 2.2 to 3.5 grams per kilogram. Now, some of you guys are choking right now thinking, I can't eat 3.5 grams per kilo or 1.6 grams per pound. I weigh 200 pounds. So 300 grams of protein for me, that would be a lot of protein. I'm not sure I could eat that much whole food protein, meat. I don't think I could. And eggs. I'd have to supplement. But they're saying they find good results for people who are, really pushing, really trying to build. All right. Eating a lot, or they actually, as I put last week's podcast, a lot of benefits to people trying to reverse type 2 diabetes in that range, in that gram per pound of body weight, or improve insulin sensitivity levels and burn fat because they're not taking in carbs. They're trying to burn more fat. So getting in enough protein, that's been shown to be very effective at improving body composition, improving your muscle to fat ratio or lean mass to ratio, ratio. And in terms of bone mass, there's a lot of fear of people say, oh, too much protein is bad for your bones. No, You store protein in your bone, not just collagen, but you store some protein in your bone. If you have if you're not taking enough protein, you will start taking it from bones as well. You'll have more brittle bones. Bone health from this study, bone health is also improved with protein intake. Studies showing a frequency of hip fractures with protein intake at 0.36 grams per pound of body weight, or that in kilos, that's 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight. This happens to be the RDA recommendation. So with the RDA recommendation in the US is 0.36 grams per pound. They're seeing higher frequency of hip fractures with that protein intake. So it's not enough. It might be enough to keep you alive, but it's not optimal, as I said last week's podcast. So really, I mean, we're shooting for at least double, if not triple that. Double would be the lowest end of the ranges that they're talking about here. It would be 0.75 grams per pound of body weight. So, I mean, again, we store this stuff in bones. We store it in muscle tissue. We're going to burn it for fuel. The other thing, so, I mean, in terms of red meat, red meat's a great source of protein, but also of phosphorus, which is a major nutrient in meat, is what I'm saying. So that's what we store in bones. Protein and phosphorus are two major components, as well as calcium. Obviously, everybody knows calcium. They realize that we need more protein and phosphorus for strong bones. Phosphorus is incredibly abundant in red meat, especially liver, like lamb or beef liver, or any kind of ruminant. So, deer, buffalo, elk, goat, whatever, any kind of ruminant, you're going to find a lot of, but beef liver, phosphorus, for sure. So, and personally, I mean, I try to get mine in as few meals as possible, just because I do a lot of intermittent fasting. I have one day a week where I just do dinner to dinner. But I try to get as few meals as possible just to keep, because I want to stay insulin sensitive for as long as possible. Into my golden years, I want to stay insulin sensitive. I want to keep my insulin levels low. I want to have, healthy blood sugar, healthy insulin levels. That's the beginning. That's where you hold on to your health. It's avoiding lifestyle diseases, because they all start from insulin resistance and high blood sugar levels. So when I work out, maybe like with weights 3 or 4 times a week. Right now it's 3, believe it or not. That's where I feel like I'm good for right now. I'm not trying to build. But that's really about the only time I have a shake during the day. So I will take in a protein shake right after a workout, about 25 or 30 grams. But within a couple hours, 1 to 2 hours, I'll have a whole food meal that is closer to, say, 70 grams of protein at that one meal. And when I'm not weight training that day, so 3, 4 other days a week, that's what I do. When I do finally eat, like somewhere between, say, I don't know, 11:30 and 2, when I have my first meal, it will be about 70 grams of protein, give or take. Could be sometimes as low as 60, sometimes as much as 80, 85. I try to get in as much as I can, depending on how I feel, but usually starting with about 2 or 3 ounces of beef liver, which I primarily eat because like a nutrient. I treat it like a multivitamin. So I'm eating the liver for the protein or the fat. I'm eating it for all the micronutrients in there, the vitamin A, the phosphorus, all the fantastic selenium, all the nutrients in the beef liver. Then I'll also have 4 whole eggs, which is another 24 grams, 6 grams per egg, give or take. About 24 grams there. There's probably about 5 grams per ounce in liver. So that's 10 to 15 grams. So we're up to about 35 or 40 there, grams. And then I'll eat another 6 to 8 ounces of meat, which is about 35 to 45 grams of protein. So right there, looking at the 75, 80, top end, maybe 85 range, depending on what I'm having for that 6 to 8 ounces. It could be meat leftovers from the night before. It could be some salmon. It could be oysters, sardines. I mean, I try to mix that up to get different nutrients. And some of them, if they're a little bit lighter, like salmon compared to beef, I can eat a little bit more of it. But generally speaking, that's the ballpark. I'm getting at least 65, usually 70, 75, 80 grams, and I'm pushing it. I mean, that takes some work. I'm like, okay, I need to get this much in. It's deliberate. It's not, I'm hungry all the way through. It's like I need to get this much protein in my body. It's a chore. It's part of my plan. It's deliberate. And then dinner. So that'll be lunch, like I said, or the first meal of the day. And then I'll have dinner. I don't eat again until dinner. I'm not hungry. Right? After eating that much, you wouldn't be either. You're not hungry. Cravings come down. You're quite satisfied. There's always some naturally occurring fat with those foods, liver for sure, eggs, and whatever meat I'm having. That also keeps me satiated. But the protein is pretty impactful on that and keeping you satiated or satisfied. Then dinner is another 8 to 12 ounces of meat as well. So another 50 to 75 grams of protein right there. Again, I weigh 205, 210. So let's like say 94-ish kilos. I'm not making it. I'm not getting to 1 gram per pound on many days. There's days when I do. There's days when I've calculated it and I found, I hit 220 or I hit 210, 190. I'm getting in the ballpark, but there's a lot of days where I come up short. I'm in that more 0.75, 0.85, 0.9 range of grams per pound. And I'm doing okay. But again, I'm not working out 5 days a week. I'm not lifting weights 5 days a week and then doing a tremendous amount of exercise. And that would probably affect my intake to some degree. But it's sometimes it's a struggle. It's deliberate, but it's a struggle. Like I'm to get to that, get close to my weight number in protein to get the 1 gram per pound. Now, my recommendation, if this is new to you, fat burning is your priority, and you're kind of just your diet's not really super planned out, or it's just kind of hit and miss, don't have a real plan for it, I recommend 2 or 3 meals a day. And if you're used to snacking, just start with getting 3 meals, no snacks. Okay. So a breakfast, lunch, dinner, prioritize protein. If you want to make the breakfast small, that's probably good, because at some point you could eliminate it much easier if it's smaller, and then have bigger lunches and dinners. If you're lifting a lot and you're trying to grow, different story. You can 3, maybe even 4 meals, try to get as much protein as you can. I'd say at least 50 grams per meal, depending on what you need on your size and what your goal is. But, if you're okay with getting 150 or less, you can do that in 3 meals, 150 grams or less. But, 30 to 50 grams per meal is about right. You figure, again, 6 grams per ounce of the meat, the meat, fish, whatever it is, or 6 grams per egg. You could figure that out and try to get close to, I would recommend definitely trying to get close to your body weight. At least go for 100 grams of protein a day. If this is new to you, it's a starting goal. 2 meals or 2 meals of 50, 3 meals of 35 or more as a baby step, get you started. And I think you'll find your body will adjust and you'll be able to eat more as you go, but it does take some adjustment time, just to be honest. So you won't be hungry. Your cravings will go down. Your blood sugar will stabilize. Insulin levels will start coming down. If that's an issue, you're basically going to be healthier overall. But it's going to get easier with time, but you won't feel like snacking, and you'll allow your body to access body fat, burn more fat, use the protein either for rebuilding tissue, you're part of your protein turnover, and not use as much muscle. So preserving muscle, because you can oxidize that protein. Again, you're going to go into gluconeogenesis anyway. My keto people, you're going to go into gluconeogenesis anyway. You might as well supply the protein you need to make it effective without, so find your medium effective without breaking down too much muscle. Okay. And to make up for any exercise that you're doing. I'm not saying it's the same for everybody, but generally speaking, 100 grams is pretty minimal. If you're anywhere over, say, 140 pounds, 130, 140 pounds, that should definitely be your goal. If you're one of these 100-pound little people, that's great. I'm happy for you. I would definitely take in the protein just to avoid maybe the risk of osteoporosis as you get older, and put on some muscle. Okay. Shoot for that. It might be tough. You might just need 80 at your size. that's fine. But you guys are, you're not struggling to burn fat. So I'm guessing you're probably fine with your weight. You just need to improve body composition. But if you're anywhere over 130, 140 pounds, you can easily handle 100 grams of protein a day. Whole food sources is my recommendation. But again, I have all these resources and some articles here if you want to go through them and just get more detail and look at the studies. And I'm always open to answering questions. If you want to email me at zane@zanegriggs.com or reach out to me on Instagram, I'm pretty active there, Zane Griggs Fitness. But I'd love to hear from you, answer your questions. This was a topic I got a lot of questions about. I thought we might as well talk about it because it's there's a lot of confusion around it. And the only research people seem to know about is older, flawed research. And this stuff is current. This stuff's in PubMed. It's in, medical type stuff, Science Direct. There's some med journals here. And then there's some just more, some articles that are just pretty, shall we say, open to the public, typical public type resources, that link to certain studies if you really want to get into it, but they're more in layman's terms. So that might be more appealing to some of you as well. There's a mix of the ultra technical and the pretty, colloquial language. So again, look forward to hearing back from you because it gives me great topics to talk about. I love your questions. Gives me something to talk about here. Talk to you later.